Welcome to Neo-Historia, the gateway to the past where stories of history, life, geopolitics, and humanity intertwine. I'm your host, Harry Pankabaig, and on this channel, we embark on a journey through time to explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. From ancient civilizations to modern-day events, join us as we unravel the threads of the past, gaining insights into the world we live in today. Get ready to delve into the depths of history with a fresh perspective, right here on Harry Pankabaig's Neo-Historia. Many people worldwide struggle to grasp what it means to be Rasta. For some, understanding the Rastafari movement is challenging because they view Rastafari merely as a religious belief. Many perceive Rastafari as solely Jamaican, associating it with smoking ganja and having dreadlocks. However, these perceptions miss the deeper essence of the movement. The idea that Rastafari is exclusively Jamaican is erroneous. Rastafari is more than just a religion. It's a mindset, a social movement, and even a way of life. Since its inception, the Rastafari movement has extended far beyond the shores of Jamaica. Rasta culture can be found across Europe, Asia, New Zealand, the United States, and notably, Africa. Rastafarians now reside worldwide. The Rastafari movement originated from the impoverished and oppressed Afro-Jamaican community in the 1930s. It stemmed from the teachings of Marcus Garvey, a prominent Jamaican leader and mass motivator. Garvey urged African people worldwide to unite and return to their African homeland, advocating for an Afrocentric ideology. This ideology served as a response to British colonial culture, promoting Black consciousness and the rediscovery of Black identity, both personally and racially. Rastafari sought to replace imperialist culture with a renewed African heritage, rejecting beliefs in Black inferiority and white superiority. Therefore, Rastafari embodies Afrocentric beliefs that equate Blackness with Africa, supporting the idea of Pan-Africanism. Garvey's ability to unite people of African descent raised awareness among Black communities worldwide. His political Pan-African consciousness successfully unified Black nations in the Americas and the Caribbean islands. Consequently, Garvey established the influential political party, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNMIA, to disseminate his activities. Garvey also founded the newspaper Negro World, providing information to Black communities worldwide about African affairs. During a monumental UNMIA meeting at Madison Square Garden in 1920, attended by 25,000 members, Garvey prophesied, "Look to Africa, where a Black king shall be crowned. He shall be the Redeemer." This statement became the foundation of the Rastafari movement. Additionally, Garvey often used biblical terms in his teachings to liberate his movement from white oppression, although the literal interpretation of these terms remains ambiguous. In conclusion, the Rastafari movement encompasses more than a religious belief. It embodies a profound cultural and social awakening rooted in Afrocentrism and Pan-Africanism. Understanding Rastafari requires delving beyond stereotypes to grasp its rich historical and ideological significance. Shortly after Garvey's prophecy, on November 2, 1930, a man named Tafari Makanan, also known as Rastafari, claimed himself as Emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie I, along with the traditional titles of King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah. For many Jamaicans, this fulfilled Garvey's prophecy regarding the coronation of a Black king, signifying the arrival of their Messiah. Upon hearing this, many began to identify themselves as Rastafari. For these new Rastafarians, Ethiopia became their Zion, and they regarded Haile Selassie as the Black Messiah, or in their language, Jah Rastafari, the Savior believed to redeem Black people from white oppression and reunite them with their homeland in Africa. Garvey's strategy of amalgamating Ethiopianism and Pan-Africanism proved to be a potent force, awakening Black consciousness to continue the resistance against white oppression. The straightforward teachings of Garvey provided the spirit and inspiration for the birth of the Rastafari community. The first generation of Rastafarians emerged in the Pinnacle area of Jamaica around 1935. Despite the absence of a formal central church, various Rastafarian factions found common ground in their belief in lineage traced back to ancient Israelites, black superiority, and the return of the diaspora from Babylonian oppression to Africa. The early leaders of this movement were Protestant Christian pastors named Leonard Howell, Archibald Dunkley, and Joseph Hibbard. They vigorously preached the coronation of Emperor Haile Selassie in 1930 as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. They proclaimed that all black people would gain superiority over whites, a privilege previously denied to them. Howell, in particular, explicitly taught that the Emperor of Ethiopia was the king of all African nations and deserved more respect than the King of England. However, Mussolini's forces invaded Ethiopia, and a year later, in 1936, Haile Selassie fled into exile with his family. This event marked a significant upheaval for the Rastafari movement, testing their faith and convictions amidst political turmoil. During his exile, Haile Selassie delivered a famous speech at the League of Nations in Geneva, pleading for assistance against the colonial powers. Despite his efforts to raise awareness of Ethiopia's plight in Europe, Selassie spent 5 years away from his homeland. He resided primarily at Fairfield House, but also spent time in London and in the Caribbean. Marcus Garvey harshly criticized Selassie for leaving his people under Italian rule. Haile Selassie regained his power as emperor in 1941 with the support of the British. Despite the political turmoil, Selassie's actions as a promoter of the Rastafari movement successfully inspired others to help develop and spread its message. By the mid-1950s, various Rastafarian groups emerged at different points along the Jamaican coastline, awaiting ships bound for Africa. This marked the first unification of Rastafarian followers and paved the way for the movement's future in advocating for repatriation to Africa and freedom for black people. Preachers like Robert Hines, Joseph Hibbard, and Archibald Dunkley gained prominence during this decade. However, many scholars consider Leonard Howell, a former member of Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, as the most significant figure in early Rastafari. Howell attracted many followers after returning from an extensive trip to Jamaica in 1932, where he outlined the principles of the nascent movement with the publication of The Promised Key around 1935. Despite being perceived as dangerous and subversive by the Jamaican government, Howell continued his efforts. In 1939, he founded the Ethiopian Salvation Society, ESS, and the following year he established the Rasta commune known as Pinnacle in the Street Catherine Mountains. Pinnacle served as an autonomous community for thousands of individuals who cultivated ganja for spiritual sessions and economic support. However, their dependence on the illegal plant also provided authorities with reasons to crack down. In May 1954, a series of raids led to the arrest of over 100 Rastafarians and the destruction of approximately 3 tons of ganja, effectively dismantling the commune. A radical version of Rastafari known as Nyabingi emerged from the slums of Kingston, Jamaica's capital, preceding the Bingi Mansion or Yacht Black branch. Yacht Black followers were known for their aggressive stance towards authorities and introduced several characteristics often associated with Rastafari, including growing dreadlocks and a unique dialect. For adherents, Haile Selassie was the incarnation of Jah, and Ethiopia was their spiritual homeland, historically and symbolically. During those years, the leaders of the palace supported the return of the African diaspora to the African continent. In the late 1940s, although Haile Selassie reportedly rejected the Rastafari portrayal of him as the Messiah, he seemed to support Rastafari goals by donating 500 hectares for the development of an Ethiopian community called Shashaman. Shashaman provided an opportunity for Jamaicans and other black people to fulfill their long-standing hope of returning to their homeland. Over the following 2 decades, various other variants of Rastafari gained devoted followers. Nyabingi is the oldest of the 3 major Rastafarian houses, Nyabinghi adherents follow strict vegan and organic dietary patterns. This house traces its origins to a legendary East African woman who had many faithful followers in the late 19th century. In 1958, Prince Emmanuel Charles Edward founded the International Congress of Ethiopia, or Bobo Asante. They believed in separation from mainstream society, strict dietary laws, and gender segregation. Bobo Asante followers still regarded Haile Selassie as their main prophet, but they also elevated Marcus Garvey to a prophetic level. Members of Bobo Asante adhere to a patriarchal social code, where women must cover their bodies at all times, and men and women occupy separate social spaces in thought and practice. However, this house is not inherently misogynistic, especially since Bobo Asante lives separately from mainstream Jamaican society. They only smoke ganja during worship and never in public. The early leaders of this movement were Protestant Christian pastors named Leonard Howell, Archibald Dunkley, and Joseph Hibbert. They vigorously preached the coronation of Emperor Haile Selassie in 1930 as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. They proclaimed that all black people would gain superiority over whites, a privilege previously denied to them. Howell, in particular, explicitly taught that the Emperor of Ethiopia was the king of all African nations and deserved more respect than the King of England. However, Mussolini's forces invaded Ethiopia, and a year later, in 1936, Haile Selassie fled into exile with his family. This event marked a significant upheaval for the Rastafari movement, testing their faith and convictions amidst political turmoil. During his exile, Haile Selassie delivered a famous speech at the League of Nations in Geneva, pleading for assistance against the colonial powers. Despite his efforts to raise awareness of Ethiopia's plight in Europe, Selassie spent 5 years away from his homeland. He resided primarily at Fairfield House, but also spent time in London and in the Caribbean. Marcus Garvey harshly criticized Selassie for leaving his people under Italian rule. Haile Selassie regained his power as emperor in 1941 with the support of the British. Despite the political turmoil, Selassie's actions as a promoter of the Rastafari movement successfully inspired others to help develop and spread its message. By the mid-1950s, various Rastafarian groups emerged at different points along the Jamaican coastline, awaiting ships bound for Africa. This marked the first unification of Rastafarian followers and paved the way for the movement's future in advocating for repatriation to Africa and freedom for black people. Preachers like Robert Hines, Joseph Hibbert, and Archibald Dunkley gained prominence during this decade. However, many scholars consider Leonard Howell, a former member of Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, as the most significant figure in early Rastafari. Howell attracted many followers after returning from an extensive trip to Jamaica in 1932, where he outlined the principles of the nascent movement with the publication of The Promised Key around 1935. Despite being perceived as dangerous and subversive by the Jamaican government, Howell continued his efforts. In 1939, he founded the Ethiopian Salvation Society, ESS, and the following year, he established the Rasta commune known as Pinnacle in the Street Catherine Mountains. Pinnacle served as an autonomous community for thousands of individuals who cultivated ganja for spiritual sessions and economic support. However, their dependence on the illegal plant also provided authorities with reasons to crack down. In May 1954, a series of raids led to the arrest of over 100 Rastafarians and the destruction of approximately 3 tons of ganja, effectively dismantling the commune. A radical version of Rastafari known as Nyabinghi emerged from the slums of Kingston, Jamaica's capital, preceding the Binghi Mansion or Yacht Black branch. Yacht Black followers were known for their aggressive stance towards authorities and introduced several characteristics often associated with Rastafari, including growing dreadlocks and a unique dialect. For adherents, Haile Selassie was the incarnation of Jah, and Ethiopia was their spiritual homeland. historically and symbolically. During those years, the leaders of the palace supported the return of the African diaspora to the African continent. In the late 1940s, although Haile Selassie reportedly rejected the Rastafari portrayal of him as the Messiah, he seemed to support Rastafari goals by donating 500 hectares for the development of an Ethiopian community called Shashaman. Shashaman provided an opportunity for Jamaicans and other black people to fulfill their long-standing hope of returning to their homeland. Over the following 2 decades, various other variants of Rastafari gained devoted followers. Nyabinghi is the oldest of the 3 major Rastafarian houses. Nyabinghi adherents follow strict vegan and organic dietary patterns. This house traces its origins to a legendary East African woman who had many faithful followers in the late 19th century. In 1958, Prince Emmanuel Charles Edward founded the International Congress of Ethiopia, or Bobo Asante. They believed in separation from mainstream society, strict dietary laws, and gender segregation. Bobo Asante followers still regarded Haile Selassie as their main prophet, but they also elevated Marcus Garvey to a prophetic level. Members of Bobo Asante adhere to a patriarchal social code, where women must cover their bodies at all times, and men and women occupy separate social spaces in thought and practice. However, this house is not inherently misogynistic, especially since Bobo Asante lives separately from mainstream Jamaican society. They only smoke ganja during worship and never in public. After World War II, Jamaica began a relatively long transition towards full political independence. Jamaicans preferred British culture over American, but they had a love-hate relationship with Britain, resenting British dominance, racism, and colonial dictation. Gradually, the British gave the colony more self-governance through constitutional changes. Political patterns and governmental structures in Jamaica were shaped during the 2 decades of what was called constitutional decolonization, from 1944 to independence in 1962. However, despite the start of a new chapter in Jamaica's history with its official independence from Britain in 1962, negative attitudes and suppression from the government toward Rastafari persisted in the 1950s. The countercultural views of Rastafari clashed with other Jamaican societal groups and often led to conflicts with law enforcement. The presence of Rastafari was deemed disruptive by Jamaican authorities, leading to frequent oppression and negative stigma. Some outspoken Rastafarians advocating for black supremacy were labeled as insane and institutionalized in mental hospitals. The Rasta community was also branded as violent lovers and criminals. The most infamous incident occurred during what became known as Bad Friday in April 1963, when police arrested and brutally beat around 150 innocent Rastafarians in response to a militant attack at a gas station. In 1968, the 12 Tribes of Israel was established by Fernand Carrington, also known as Prophet Gad, advocating for daily Bible readings and emphasizing the lineage of the group. Unlike Nyabinghi and Bobo Asante, the 12 Tribes of Israel are more socially liberal. Membership is not restricted to black individuals. Bob Marley was a longtime member of the 12 Tribes, although he later moved to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church shortly before his death in the early 1970s. It became evident in the early 1970s that the Rastafari movement had taken root among Jamaican youth. This was highlighted by the successful campaign of Michael Manley, the leader of the People's National Party, in the 1972 presidential election. Manley received a staff of correction from Emperor Haile Selassie and used Rasta dialect in public speeches. Rastafari rhetoric transformed English language in such a way as to help them better understand the world and protest perceived injustices. They often changed words from negative to positive meanings. For instance, overstand instead of understand meant grasping a concept fully and comprehensively. Rastafarians almost never use negative terms, always replacing them with something positive. This reflects how Rastafarians always view everything positively. They also refused to use English in its raw form as a symbol of their resistance to colonialism. They modified and developed their own Rasta language, which was implemented in daily life. Examples include Bridrin and Sistrin as terms for Rastafarian men and women. While the Rastafari movement spread through Jamaican migration to the UK, Canada, and the USA from the 1950s to the 1970s, its global growth was aided by the influence of its followers on popular music. Early contributors in this field were Count Ossie, who began playing drums in his Nyabingi spiritual sessions and helped develop what later became known as ska. Later, the movement found its most important ambassador in Bob Marley, a convert to Rastafari and the pioneer of reggae music. Charismatic and unapologetic, Bob Marley referenced his beliefs in his songs, gaining widespread recognition in the 1970s for themes of brotherhood, oppression, and redemption that resonated universally. Marley toured extensively, bringing his music to Europe, Africa, and the US, becoming a leading figure of the Rastafari movement. Meanwhile, as Rastafari became increasingly popular among people of different races and cultures, it led to changes in some of its stricter regulations. Book titled Dread the Rastafarians of Jamaica, written by Catholic priest and social worker Joseph Owens in the 1970s, highlighted several challenges faced by the movement. Some sects chose not to emphasize black superiority in favor of promoting messages of equality and mutual respect. A turning point for Rastafari occurred with the deposition of Emperor Haile Selassie in 1974 by the Ethiopian military and his subsequent death in 1975. These events triggered a crisis of faith among Rastafarian followers. Some decided to leave the movement, while others remained steadfast, developing new interpretations in response to the news of Selassie's death. Some Rastafarians believed that Selassie had not truly died, and reports of his death were Western deception. To support this argument, they claimed that Selassie's body was never displayed publicly, and it wasn't until 1992 that his remains were allegedly found buried beneath his palace. Others believed that while Selassie's physical body had passed away, his spirit remained as a spiritual force. According to a third interpretation, Selassie's death was not significant because he was merely a manifestation of Jah and not Jah himself. During his lifetime, Selassie considered himself a devout Christian. In a 1967 interview, when asked about the Rastafarian belief that he was the second coming of Jesus, he replied, "I have heard of this idea. I have also met some Rastafarians. I told them clearly that I am a man, that I am a human being, and I will be succeeded by generations to come, and they should not make a mistake in assuming or pretending that a human being has emanated from a deity." His grandson, Ermias Saul Selassie, also stated that there was no doubt that Haile Selassie never supported the Rastafari movement. Critics of the Rastafari religion have used Selassie's statements as evidence that the belief system is flawed. However, some Rastafarians interpret Selassie's response as evidence that he truly was the incarnation of God, according to their interpretation of the Gospel of Luke. The emergence and growth of the Rastafari movement in the Caribbean islands directly stemmed from the legacy of slavery. Slavery aimed to crush the slaves' efforts to form their cultural identity and desire for freedom. European powers forcibly took many Africans as slaves, dispersing them across the world. The areas of captivity became known as Babylon to Africans, symbolizing their cultural oppression by whites. Slave owners treated them as subhuman, almost like pets, assigning status based on their work and lightness of skin. The suffering of black Africans began even from their recruitment in Africa, through their inhumane transport, to the brutal treatment by overseers and plantation owners, particularly in the Americas, notably Jamaica and the Caribbean islands. Many slaves died while traveling for work or were killed by armed forces when they rebelled. Besides physical violence, African slaves also experienced psychological violence through insults about their race, seen as weak, lazy, and uncivilized. These insults deeply affected the descendants of African slaves. Even though slavery was officially abolished in 1865, the inferior stigma continued to be perpetuated by white people through popular culture like films. Awareness of Africa being seen as culturally inferior made black people in America doubt themselves. They started imitating the lifestyle, ethics, and aesthetic standards of white Europeans. On the other hand, African nations haven't completely freed themselves from white oppression. Africans faced discrimination, negative stigma, and were treated as low-status workers in the neo-colonial era. Slave owners not only treated slaves as inferior, but also taught them that Africa itself was inferior, a dark continent full of uncivilized languages, cultures, and customs. This reflects the activities of Christian churches in sending missionaries to Africa to bring civilization and salvation. Strangely, slave owners not only prevented slaves from practicing their African religions, but also prohibited them from practicing Christianity. In response, some influential black intellectuals, like Marcus Garvey, attempted to reconstruct the history of African races. Through academic research, Garvey discovered that Africa had a rich civilization, artistic culture, and strong nationhood. With his political activities, Garvey aimed to instill pride in being of African descent and fight against all forces oppressing black people. It's no wonder the Rastafari movement emerged from the desire to express an alternative form of religion and realize a united and independent Africa. Rastafari is seen as a convergence of the maroon heritage of black people fighting against slavery in America, with a focus on returning to the mountains and the emergence of the Pan-African movement. Therefore, Rastafari identity is understood as an evolution of cultural resistance. This is why its followers and some scholars view it as a way of life, a philosophy, or a code of ethics. The term Rastafari comes from Ras and Tafari. Ras means duke or prince in Semitic languages like Ethiopia, while Tafari means one to be feared. Rastafari refers to Rastafari Makanan, the pre-coronation name of Emperor Haile Selassie. It's unclear why Rastas chose this title as the name for their movement. In addition to being the name of the movement, Rastafari also refers to its followers. Many commentators, including some academic sources and Rastafari adherents themselves, refer to this movement as Rastafarianism. However, many Rastafarians dislike the term Rastafarianism, believing that the use of the suffix ism, which implies doctrinal religion or institutional organization, is something they want to avoid. On the other hand, religion is defined as a fairly integrated system of beliefs and practices that form a moral group known as a church, temple, or mosque. This essentially implies for Rastafarian followers that religion, along with its ritual rules and regulations, is like a human-made institution. During the first 3 decades of the Rastafari movement, there was a strong emphasis on returning to the African continent. Many Rastafarian followers lobbied the Jamaican government and the United Nations to oversee this process. Ras-Talon prepared for their own return to Africa. Critics of the Rastafari movement argue that the relocation of all African diasporas to the African continent is unlikely, especially because no African country would be willing to accept them. However, by the 4th decade, the desire among Rastafarians to return to Africa had diminished. One of the factors driving this change was the Ethiopian famine of 1983 to 1985. In addition to this famine, many Rastafarians began to believe that returning to Africa was a metaphorical idea that referred to the renewal of pride and self-confidence as Black Africans. Alongside this awareness emerged the term liberation before repatriation, which began to be used by Rastafarian followers. Even some Rastafarian followers wanted to change Western society so that they could live comfortably instead of returning to Africa. However, many Rastafarians still emphasize the importance of physically returning to the African continent. Rastafarian followers identify themselves as the children of Israel, God's chosen people in the Old Testament. They even believe that Black people as a whole, or Rastafarian followers specifically, are descendants or reincarnations of the children of Israel. This belief is similar to Judaism, although many Rastafarians believe that the current Jewish claims of being descendants of the children of Israel are misguided. Rastafari has monotheistic beliefs and worships only one God, referred to as Yah. The term Yah is an abbreviation of Yahweh in the Old Testament. Rastafarian followers believe that Yah is an immanent God. In other words, Rastafarian followers believe that Yah is within everyone's soul. This belief is reflected in the Rastafarian mantra that God is man and man is God. Rastafarian followers believe that they know Yah, only believe in and to unravel the gap between man and God. Therefore, Rastafarian followers generally believe that Black Africans are God's chosen people, meaning that they once made a covenant with God and therefore have a special responsibility. Rastafari also believes that this identity is the true identity of Black Africans. However, this has been forgotten and should be revived according to Rastafarian teachings. According to Rastafarian doctrine, the Black African diaspora are the people in exile in Babylon, which refers to Western society. For Rastafarian followers, European colonization and global capitalism are manifestations of Babylon, while the police and military are its enforcers. The term Babylon is used because it's associated with the Bible in the Old Testament. Babylon was a city in Mesopotamia where the children of Israel were once exiled between 597 and 586 BC. Rastafarian followers compare the exile of the children of Israel to Mesopotamia with the exile of Black Africans out of Africa. In the New Testament, Babylon is a euphemism for the Roman Empire, which is considered to act destructively like the ancient Babylonians. Rastafarian followers believe that the exile of Black Africans to Babylon was an experience filled with suffering, and the concept of suffering holds a significant position in Rastafarian discourse. The idea of Babylon is used in dialectical opposition to the concept of Zion, Africa, Ethiopia, or heaven, which is considered the authentic and sacred homeland, referred to as the Garden of Eden and the birthplace of all humanity. Zion is seen as the gathering place for all those who have not accepted Babylon's false teachings. This is the point where Judaism and Christianity intersect. Jesus is an important figure in Rastafarian spirituality, but Rastafarian followers reject the Christian view of Jesus, especially his portrayal as a white European. Rastafarians believe that this is a distortion of facts. Rastafarian followers believe that Jesus was a Black African, while the white Jesus is an idol. Many Rastafarian followers view Christianity as a creation of white people and suspect the religion based on the belief that the oppressors, white Europeans, and the oppressed Black Africans cannot have the same God. Many Rastafarians believe that the God worshipped by most white Christians is actually a devil, and Rastafarian followers often claim that the Pope is a devil or Antichrist. Therefore, Rastafarianism regards Christian preachers as deceivers and believes that Christianity is responsible for the oppression of African people. Rastafarian followers even consider Christianity to have enslaved the soul. Therefore, Rastafarian followers believe that Babylon is responsible for the Atlantic slave trade, which expelled Africans from their homeland and caused the poverty that now haunts the African diaspora. Rastafarian followers use the Bible to explain the Atlantic slave trade, believing that slavery, exile, and exploitation of Black Africans are punishments for their actions that are not in line with their status as the chosen people of Yah. Many Rastafarian followers with a Pan-African spirit criticize the division of Africa into many nations, believing it to be orchestrated by Babylon to exploit resources in Africa. They also oppose the extraction of Africa's natural resources by global capitalists. Rastafarian followers want to destroy Babylon, as shown by the slogan Chen Dan Babylon, meaning sing the fall of Babylon. Additionally, Rastafarian followers expect that societies dominated by white people will dismiss their beliefs as heretical teachings. If this happens, they see it as confirming the truth of their faith. Therefore, It's no wonder that Rastafarian followers regard Zion as an ideal to be achieved, just as Babylon is. The term Zion comes from the Bible and refers to Jerusalem. Rastafarian followers use the term Zion to refer to Ethiopia specifically or Africa in general. Africa even holds a quasi-mythical status in Rastafarian discourse. Many Rastafarian followers equate Ethiopia with Africa. For example, Rastafarian followers in Ghana say they already live in Ethiopia. Some Rastafarian followers use Zion to refer to Jamaica or a spiritual state. By depicting Africa as the promised land, Rastafarian followers express their desire to leave the oppression and hardships they experience in Babylon. With such interpretations of the Bible, it's no wonder Rastafari has become a millenarian movement, believing that Judgment Day will come. Many Rastafarian followers believe that on Judgment Day, Babylon will fall, and Rastafarians will be among the few who survive. Rastafarian followers believe that humanity will enter a new era, an era of peace, justice, and happiness, and the righteous will live in Africa, which has become heaven. In the 1980s, many Rastafarians believed that Judgment Day would occur around the year 2000. At that time, many Rastafarian followers believed that white nations would destroy each other with nuclear weapons, and black Africans would then dominate the world. Rastafarian followers believed this was prophesied in the book of Daniel. However, some Rastafarian followers do not believe in an afterlife. They believe in the possibility of eternal life, and only the wicked will die. Religious scholar Leonard E. Barrett observed some Rastafarian followers in Jamaica who believe that Rastafarians who die unfaithful to Yah. According to Barrett's perspective, this view may be influenced by the large number of young people who became Rastafarian followers at that time, so they only saw a few Rastafarians die. According to other Rastafarian followers, those who are righteous will experience reincarnation, and their individual identity will remain attached each time they reincarnate, according to their beliefs about death. Rastafarians do not celebrate death and avoid consuming meat. They also reject the practice of ancestor worship common among followers of traditional African religions. Not all Rastafarian followers have the same view on human race. Initially, many adhered to the belief in black supremacy, believing that there was a distinct and superior black African race compared to others. However, some still hold on to this belief. Non-black Rastafarians are now also accepted in the Rastafarian movement. However, this background has led to criticism of Rastafari regarding racism. Kesmore observes that Rastafari has the potential for implicit racism, but he also highlights that racism is not inherent in the Rastafarian movement. Some Rastafarian followers acknowledge that the Rastafarian movement has issues with racism, especially towards Europeans and Asians. However, some Rastafarian sects reject the idea that white Europeans can be Rastafarian followers. Other Rastafarian sects believe that African identity is not determined by skin color, but by attitude or spirit. There might not be a more important concept for ordinary Rastafarian life than livity. This term, coined by early Rastafarians, encompasses the core cultural practices of Rastafari. Rastafari sees their culture as more than just a religious identity. It's fundamentally a way of life. Rastafari is not a highly organized religion. In fact, some Rastafarians say that it's not a religion at all, but a way of life. Most Rastafarians do not identify with any sect or denomination, although there are three prominent Rastafarian mansions: Nyabingi, Bobo Ashanti, and the 12 tribes of Israel, claiming Yah as the second coming of Jesus. Rastafari is a new spirituality that emerged from Christianity. Although Rastafari began as a religious movement, it's important to understand that Rastafari is spirituality to provide a religious context for black people who are disconnected from their roots. In its spirituality, Rastafari provides a vision of the promised land for all black people. Moreover, Rastafari is a cornerstone of black pride in the face of white supremacy. However, over time, Rastafari has evolved into a movement that opposes the existing social, economic, and political order. The Rasta community's struggle also uses cultural aspects such as music, art, and literature. One purely cultural artifact born from the Rasta community is reggae music, a development from ska and rocksteady. Reggae music successfully brings the messages and spirit of Rastafari to the world. Interesting facts about reggae music include its influence on the development of sound systems. These systems, consisting of amplifiers, allow communal enjoyment of music in open spaces. Within Rastafarian culture, there's a deep sense of spirituality where every Rasta follower embodies a divine essence. This belief is reflected in their language, particularly the use of I and I, symbolizing their connection with God. For instance, instead of saying me or my, they say I to emphasize their unity with the divine. This concept extends to replacing strong words with I, as they believe in the unity of humanity originating from I, and then the devil creating you. Spirituality for Rastafarians is seen as a network connecting humanity with the Creator and each other. It's not just a religion, but a way of life, authentic and pure, defining cultural identity and destiny. What is Rastafari, Jamaica? About Jamaica, Rastafari religion, Rastafari beliefs,